Man, I'll tell you what, I thought my dad jokes were bad, but mom jokes in this house are the real groaners.
Well, hello there, everyone, and welcome to the Bible Geeks Weekly Podcast. This is episode 149. I'm Brian Sheely.
I'm Ryan Joy.
And thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in to our 10th conversation in this guided study session we've been doing called Training Wheels. It's all about parenting. We've been talking on the last handful of episodes about shepherding and shaping our kids. And today, we're going to talk about talking. It seems so fitting, I think, as we are people who obviously like to talk. How do we talk to our kids? It's a big question.
Yeah, I think communication is one of those things that you just are always working on. Like listening and how do you speak well. It's as soon as you feel like, oh, I didn't realize I needed to learn this and now I've mastered it. And then you just stop paying attention for a minute and all of a sudden you're like a noob at it again.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. As people may not know or realize, here on the podcast, we do edit ourselves. You know, wouldn't it be nice if you just had an editor for the things that you said live in your own home? So as we kick this conversation off, we had a daily download that we launched a bunch of weeks ago, and it was called Eloquent Orations. This is Training Wheels.
Eloquent orations.
Their eyes glaze over. They stare off into the distance. Your words wash over them in waves of nonsensical noise. Like Charlie Brown's teacher, have you ever felt like your eloquent orations to your kids sound more like in their ears?
Have we lost the ability to speak our child's language somewhere along the way? Is it even possible to communicate clearly with your kids?
So as we shepherd and shape them, let's be more purposeful with what we say and how we say it.
Here's the big idea. You can talk at your child and make a lot of noise, or you can talk to them and get through.
Following Christ's example, our kids should know our voice. But it's more than recognizing the sound of someone's voice. It's about connecting with the meaning of the message.
If our message isn't received, we're not communicating. Are we being understood, or are we just spraying them with a sea of senseless sounds?
Communication isn't a one-way activity, but a two-way dialogue. Listen to them, getting to know their voice, and consider how best to respond.
It takes knowing yourself and your child to have a successful conversation. As we invest in becoming their sounding board, we do well to be quick to hear, slow to speak, controlling our tongues. James 1:19 and 26.
We communicate better when we commit to knowing our kids' world, where they're coming from, and what they're trying to tell us. Are you an effective listener or always doing the talking?
Season your words with grace, mindful of your headspace and attitude. Are you under control or losing your cool?
A small child understands tone even when they don't grasp all the words.
Whatever your child's age, how you say things can matter just as much as what you say. And remember that they will mirror what you talk about and how you say it.
So here's the big question. Are you invested in hearing your kids and helping them to hear you?
So follow along with this guided study at BibleGeeks.fm/trainingwheels.
And may the Lord bless you and keep you today.
Shalom.
There's some good alliteration in that one, spraying them with a sea of senseless sounds.
So
the big idea in that conversation starter was that you can talk at your child and make a lot of noise, or you can talk to them and get through. And I was thinking about this for our family and the way that we've kind of operated over the last few years. Somewhere along the way, we became like a closed captioning family.
Oh, us too. Yeah.
If there isn't like a transcript up on the screen, I will inevitably find myself just completely lost about whatever's being said on the show. Sort of connected to that point, we've turned down the volume as much as possible on the shows that we watch. And we're trying not to blast the speakers at full volume so that we can hear things. And so we rely on these closed captions. But if you don't have the closed captions, like having that volume super low really doesn't work. And whatever is said just kind of gets lost in the noise of the room. And so I wonder how much we as parents, what we say gets lost in the noise. And maybe my first reaction is to just like turn up the volume and speak louder. But maybe it's better if I change the way that I'm communicating altogether. I'm keeping the volume low, but maybe I'm being more clear. Maybe I'm being more direct. And maybe I'm being more intentional about what I'm saying and how I'm saying it, not just turning up the volume all the way to 11.
And the big question we ask is, are we invested in hearing our kids and helping them to hear us? And it does take investment to hear and be heard. Years ago, I asked this friend who has a gift for communication. I asked her, how do you speak so that people can hear you? How do you do this where you're always getting through to people? And she said, very poetic answer. She said, you have to listen to them, but you also have to listen to how they're listening to you. Mm-hmm. Listen to the listening. Pay attention to that other person's world that you're trying to speak into. Is your kid nervous or distracted? Are they flustered? Maybe they're hopped up on birthday cake. Whatever's going on with them affects how we try to reach them, because the point, as we said in that conversation starter, isn't to tell them things. It's to get through to them with the things we want to communicate. You not just spray them with senseless sea of all the S's that we want to say. we want to really communicate. That's an exchange of thoughts and ideas. Getting through is going to take us knowing what's going on with them and then really hearing them and helping them hear us.
It's one of the big reasons why I don't think I could ever do a podcast just by myself, because not having that sort of reciprocated listening on the other end and sort of that back and forth and that dialogue, like otherwise you're just kind of launching your words out there into the abyss and you never know how they're going to land. And I love that, listening to the listening, being able to make sure you see how those words are landing and then maybe tailoring them in the next sentence a little bit differently according to what you're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point about a podcast where it's like teaching a Bible class versus preaching. And I can't even imagine what it would be like preaching when you couldn't look at people and see, is this landing? Are they losing? Whatever.
Exactly.
So, I think, just tuning in to each other is a big part of this communication. So as we change up our communication here, we're going to do a little icebreaker. And our question to get us started here is, did your parents ever answer because I said so? And what other non-answers do parents love to give?
Yeah, I think definitely my parents answered because I said so. I think that was definitely a sort of end of the conversation kind of moment in a lot of cases. But maybe as I got a little bit older, another piece of parental authority boosting that happened quite often was, I brought you into this world and I can take you out. Especially as I got older, I heard that quite a lot. And I'm sure it was kind of meant usually like tongue in cheek, but in some ways it is true. It kind of reminds me of like Romans chapter 9, where Paul's talking about the potter and the clay and our whole role as the clay, as the one that has been created. Like, we don't get to turn around and ask God or tell God we should have been made a different way or he should have done things differently. It's like, he's in charge. He made us, and we're just kind of at the other end of that. And so for my parents, I needed to remember in those moments that, it was them who were in charge. They were the ones who made me. And it is just kind of funny to think about my parents threatening to take me out all those years.
I have a hard time hearing maybe your dad, but not your mom saying that.
Oh, yeah, it was definitely my dad.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you talked about parental authority boosting. I think we do more like parental intelligence boosting. Like, we'll talk about how great we are. Like, they'll say, why do I have to do that? Or, like if they ask, how did you know that? Well, I know everything. I'm a parent. Or, why do we have to do that? Because I'm very smart and I'm telling you to do it, or, we talk about eyes in the back of our heads and how we really have them going sometimes about that we know everything because the clues are just so obvious. They're very bad at, hiding the things that they're trying to hide. And so we're trying to teach them, one of our kids in particular, that hiding and sneaking is never going to work. And just kind of answers that are non-answers that boost our sense of omnipresence and omniscience in their minds have been popping up a lot lately.
Oh, that's good. All right, so let's get into our first segment here on the episode, and that is Like the Teacher. So we're going to go to a place where we find Jesus doing something related here to parenting, and we're going to find out how we can follow his example. He is our great shepherd, and it seems appropriate to me to go to John chapter 10, verses 3-4, where Jesus is talking all about his role as a shepherd.
Yeah, and his role that these particular verses talk about has to do with calling us. And he talks about how the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And the sheep follow him because they know his voice. And so when you think about this short piece of a longer discourse, but this idea of Jesus, our shepherd, knowing us and us knowing his voice, what does that make you think about?
Well, it doesn't make me think right off the bat about parenting. And I know the connection is there, and I know we're going to talk about it in a second, but I think what it makes me think of right off the bat is my role as a sheep. How do I respond to Jesus' voice as he is my shepherd? What is it about his voice that makes me follow? And it's almost like the golden rule of speaking. Like, if I want to be spoken to in certain ways, if I am persuaded by certain words and find certain kinds of speaking really authoritative and helpful for me, well, am I willing to pass that on and pay that forward to my kids? And so maybe it's Jesus' authority here. Could be his compassion and his empathy that he shows in his words. Maybe it's his use of like probing and thought-provoking questions. Maybe it's the way he is sincere and genuine in his approach. And I don't know, whatever it is that draws me toward following Christ, towards listening to his voice, and as he calls me, wanting to follow him, can I shepherd my kids with that same kind of, I'm going to say persuasive approach, but you know what I mean there. I mean, it's really like, if he's calling me and I'm just following him, well, that's what I want to do for my kids. And so how can I do that in the same way? And so I kind of think about it on the flip side, though. Maybe what is it that Jesus could have done? How could he have spoken? What could he have conducted himself like that would have made me not want to follow him? And maybe on the other side of that, it's a helpful investigation too about my parenting. Like, what if he was just gossiping about others behind their back the whole time? What if he was like mocking people or made fun of people? He labeled people with some kind of like dehumanizing language. Like, what if he talked a good game, but he wasn't willing to follow through with the action? So there's so many things that Jesus could have done that would have ruined his influence. And really the question that I'm asking here as I'm thinking about Jesus speaking and me following him is, how can I speak that way and really employ those kind of practices, those kinds of persuasive words of influence sincerely and truthfully towards my kids?
Yeah, I love that. I love that analogy of the golden rule of speaking. And kind of like the golden rule, you can't stop at what you would want, but it's like that's a window into starting to think about, what does this other person want? Because, as you're asking these questions, it makes me think, well, you might get, if you ask 10 different followers of Christ what it is about him that makes them want to follow him, you might get 10 different answers, and they're all true and they'd all overlap. And if we made a list, we might all get to the same list. But there's different things that are speaking to us or connecting with us. And in the same way, we're going to need to connect with our different children in different ways. We're going to need to connect with them in the moments they're in, like we talked about. And I like that idea of really trying to, that it's about who we are, that they see in us something that makes them want to be persuaded, as you said, because just like Christ makes us want to be persuaded. So I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that we visited a sheep farm not long ago, and we learned some things about sheep. The sheep farmer said that the sheep will go with her out of the barn if she or her dad or her grandpa calls them, because they know their voices. And I'm like, ding, 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 sermon illustration or something. And in fact, she said sheep can know and remember up to 50 voices.
Oh, wow.
but they won't follow anyone that they don't know. So you could have a bunch of different shepherds, just like in the church. We have, the church, each church has different shepherds. We have two parents in a home, but they won't follow anyone that they don't know. And of course, it's not about the voice. They don't follow their favorite voices, some great soprano or whatever. I don't know. They follow the voice because they know the shepherd. They've come to trust them. And so with Christ, like you said, Jesus is somebody we want to follow. Jesus knows us. He knows my name. I know his name. He's communicated to me, to you, with his actions. He's called us with his unique voice. We hear him, we follow, because he leaves no doubt about his character and his commitment to us. And our kids really are a lot like sheep in that way. We've talked about this before, how kids really are kind of like sheep. They know instinctively who they want to run to when they're scared, right? They go to dad, or they go to mom. They grab your hand and they want to walk with you whenever they're scared, or where to go when they're hurt or when they need help. They care what some voices say more than others. And I have a feeling that, Brian, as our kids get a little older and we get into that next phase of parenting we keep preparing ourselves for and talking about, maybe it'll be harder to keep their ears tuned to us. I remember those teen years, and I can just see that job getting a little harder, but that is part of our job, is to keep showing them who we are, that we're worth trusting, even if they don't like what we have to say sometimes.
Yeah, I think bringing that back to trust is also, it's such an important foundation, really, for this relationship that we have with our kids. If it's not based on trust, then it really is just going to crumble apart, because they have to be able to trust us. And what we say really just plays such an important part of that. And I think integrity, goes along with that, and making sure that we are honest and trustworthy, and that what we say we follow through on. And so I think so much of this, as we look to Jesus, we trust him, and we implicitly just know that whatever he tells us is for our good. And maybe our kids don't always see that. Maybe they don't understand like the good surrounding what it is that we're actually sharing with them and helping guide them in. But hopefully someday, maybe like I did, they'll wake up and say, oh yeah, dad was right. Mom was right. The things that they shared with us, that was for our good. And I don't know if that'll ever happen, but hopefully all of our kids come to that realization someday that they could trust us in hindsight, looking back on everything.
Yeah, and hopefully it happens, some of the time when they're actually in those moments, that we're trying to guide them through. But yeah, I mean, I've definitely found myself thinking back to things that my parents have told me, and thinking about, well, I'm really glad that I heard that, or that was instilled, and maybe understanding it a little deeper as we get a little older, maybe a little more wisdom.
Yeah, a little bit more. All right, so let's move on to our second segment here on the episode, and that is Top 4 Proverbs.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Speaking of wisdom.
So there is some wisdom to spread around here, and we have 4 Proverbs that we've chosen to illustrate, I suppose, how important communication is, especially in our homes. And the first proverb here is mine, and I picked, of course, Proverbs 1, verses 8 to 9. And I had to throw this one in here before you stole it from me. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. So as I'm reading this verse, I'm kind of viewing it more from the perspective of the child. Honestly, I think that's what the verse is focused on here. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, forsake not your mother's teaching.
Yeah.
But it is on our kids to listen to us. But is what we're saying as parents valuable? Is what we're saying a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck? And I don't know that everything I say is always that kind of honorable, sort of graceful conversation that they should be hearing, that my daughter should be hearing. And I don't know. I remember seeing this video. You probably remember this too, about a dad who basically accompanied his teenage daughter, to the mall by wearing the same kind of short shorts and crop top that she was wearing.
Oh,
and
man.
It was just the most embarrassing moment, where this girl was taught a lesson by her father not to wear certain things by him wearing it out in public with her. And it was like, oh man, I saw that video, I saw that whole thing, and I was like, yes, this is very funny, unless you're that girl. And like,
Yeah.
if you were that girl in that moment, like what an embarrassing lesson to learn. And I honestly wonder sometimes if my instruction, the way that Sherilyn and I teach, is that seen as like an honorable thing that she wants to follow, or is it offensive? Maybe it's the way that we present it. Maybe it's the, thoughtfulness we put into the direction and the teaching that we're giving her. But like, I don't know, sometimes it's not about what we say. Also, it's about how we say it. We talked about that in that conversation starter. Am I presenting these difficult topics in a way that she's able to take on and feel like they're a benefit and a blessing for her? Or like, am I always on the attack? Am I just trying to poke her in the eye? Am I trying to embarrass her in public? Am I being thoughtful and gracious? Or am I almost like being malicious with the way that I teach? Sometimes it can be really hard. And I don't know, there's a lot of ways to teach. There's a lot of ways to instruct. But is the way that I'm speaking in those moments, is that helpful for her?
Yeah. And that guy's thing, obviously, even if it was just words, sometimes our words can be just shtick, like guy's thing, or, something we heard once that we're throwing out there, or, a dad joke, or
Don't say dad jokes aren't allowed, because dad jokes have to be in play here.
Man, I'll tell you what. I thought my dad jokes were bad, but mom jokes in this house are the real groaners. Adrian would own that. She's a punster with the best of them. But anyway, I think you're making a great point that it's about, again, it's about connecting. It's about how we are able to speak to them person to person, and we can still be dad and be speaking to them as two humans that need to connect, And that goes really well, I think, with the proverb that I chose, which does have to do with a word you brought up earlier, persuasiveness, but it also has to do with sweetness. And it's this collection of, it's really 4 proverbs that are bunched together, but they're a set that go together. The wise of heart is called discerning, and the sweetness of speech increases persuasiveness. Good sense is a fountain of life to him who has it, but the instruction of fools is folly. The heart of the wise makes his speech judicious and adds persuasiveness to his lips. Gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body. That's Proverbs 16:21-24. And we went maple sugaring not long ago.
What was it with you guys and like going out to the shepherds? And
I know.
Going out
we're
to
like
the boat.
We're
and all
country folk these days.
This is
It's
fun.
basically like carrying pails of maple sap around a forest. And then we had these pancakes that we cooked outside, drenched in this most amazing syrup. I bought this giant jar of it, and I got to tell you, I don't have that much of a sweet tooth, but I can't seem to get enough of this stuff. I've been finding new applications for it. Like my favorite is peanut butter and maple syrup sandwiches.
Wow.
So good. And it's like,
it pays to be a dad, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It's not like sickly sweet corn syrup kind of stuff. It's the kind of thing that leaves you wanting more. It's sweet, but it has a lot of flavor and it's light. It's the kind of sweetness that I think Proverbs here is talking about. These Proverbs start with the sweetness of speech that increases persuasiveness. Persuasiveness is brought up again here a little bit later in those verses, and it ends with how gracious words are like a honeycomb. Sweetness to the soul, health to the body. It's all about this fountain of life and that sweetness that comes from choosing words that are appropriate and sensible. And I guess, just like you were saying, we might think our best bet at persuading our kids is to bear down on them with firmness and consequences. And of course, there's a time for that. But these inspired words from God remind us that sweetness tends to be pretty persuasive. So it's usually our best bet is not the sickly sweetness of false positivity or something, but warmth and connection can help us persuade our kids to think better and choose well for themselves. And I found myself kind of like you earlier, where it seemed like you were not sure whether to call it persuading, but really that's what we're doing, is persuading our kids we want to get them to choose well. We can make them do a few things, but really we want to persuade them to think differently and to do better. I mean, that's what Christ does for us. He persuades us to be different, to follow him, and to be changed by it.
That was really good. And of course, now you know what I'm going to have after this episode, after we record. I'm going to go find myself some syrup and some peanut butter.
Oh,
make myself,
Oh, man. Do it. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Okay, so our third proverb here is one that I picked from Proverbs 18, verse 13, where the wise writer says, if one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. And what does this have to do with being a parent? Well, I think we've already established how my daughter is not the most tidy person on the face of the planet, but I have definitely been guilty of catching her in the hallway and getting after her about cleaning up her room, only to find out that she already had. Believe it or not, she had already cleaned up her room. And in my mind, her room is like in a perpetual state of disaster. But like in reality, maybe I need to be doing a better job of listening first and maybe investigating first and doing my research before I jump to some kind of conclusion. And I don't know, like being in a role of authority, I think this is why, as we were talking about maybe this word persuasive feeling strange, like I am in a role of authority as a parent. Like I know everything. I see everything. Well, not really, but like having the answers is something that I take very seriously. But that doesn't really absolve me of my responsibility toward asking questions before I jump to conclusions. Just because I'm supposed to have all the answers doesn't mean I get to just make up things as I go. And so it's a good quality to have in any conversation, but especially is important as a dad to be somebody who hears first and then gives an answer. Otherwise, I'm just going to be made a fool of if I really just am not careful with what I say.
Well, hold that thought about being made a fool of, because I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But I want to throw a bonus proverb in here that just fit what you're saying. This is one that's in the study guide list of proverbs. It's Proverbs 20, verse 12. The hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord has made them both. So, Dad, use your eyes, use your ears. That was a good lesson for all of us to investigate, to actually look and see and hear everything that's going on around us. But that's a great illustration. My last proverb, proverb number 4, is two verses that are put together that if they were separated, people would say, oh, they're contradicting each other, but they're obviously intentionally right next to each other. Proverbs 26, verses 4 and 5. Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. And so the lest at the end of those really tells us the meaning of the beginning and how they're really saying two different things that are always true. It's not sometimes do this, sometimes do that. It's both of these are always true. It's just we have to get what the meaning of each different piece of it. And you talked about be made a fool. Have you ever watched the Shaquille O'Neal segment on Inside the NBA called Shaqtin' a Fool?
Sadly, I have seen it.
Oh, man. Yeah. I think that show is one of my favorite sports shows, but I love Shaqtin' a Fool because, you know, he's Shaq. He's talking like this, and this low voice is just talking about all the ridiculous things that are happening around the NBA. That was a horrible Shaquille O'Neal, but low voice, you get the idea.
We got it.
And there seems to be this just endless supply of people Shaqtin' a Fool for him to draw on. And I was just thinking sometimes what happens at our house could provide a pretty good collection of clips for a segment like that.
Oh, man.
Sometimes our kids are just acting a fool, Shaqtin' a fool. And my job is not to answer a fool according to their folly while I'm answering them according to their folly. In other words, I can't go acting a fool with them. The worst thing I can do is match their emotional outburst with an outburst of my own. I can't get sucked into broken kid logic arguments or be dishonest or do anything that lets their foolishness drive my response. And at the same time, I have to communicate with them in a way they understand that breaks through the noise of their folly with some wisdom and order. And sometimes that might mean I have to be loud and firm to get through. Sometimes it means I need to meet them where they are in their confusion and their emotion and their language. I have to get through and set them back on solid ground without losing my own solid footing. And so I love those two proverbs put together. I've never thought about them from a parenting perspective, but as I've read those, I'm just thinking about all the situations I run into where I'm seeing some foolishness. And it is really important to ground yourself, not answering a fool according to their folly. And I know I just keep calling my kids fools, and they're not fools, but they're foolish sometimes. And yet I have to meet them where they are. And sometimes it takes a certain kind of answer where, lest they're wise in their own eyes, I have to kind of sometimes strike back with my answer, lest they be wise in their own eyes, to destabilize their own folly and put them back on a different ground, different footing. Or I have to, again, maybe it's more tenderness or more whatever, to meet them where they are, again, without getting sucked into it.
I mean, you were talking about how your kids aren't fools, but Proverbs 22 verse 15, folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him.
That's a good verse, yeah.
I think that really makes the connection between what you're saying here. And I love that verse, those two verses put together, how it's really, I think it highlights the balance there. It'd be really easy for us to just say, like, here is the rule, like, this is what you do, but it depends on the situation. You know, it really depends on, like, should I answer this situation with a firmness and a aggressive kind of tone? Should I answer it quietly? Do I need to be like them myself? Well, no, that's not the case. But do I just stay quiet? Well, no, I don't stay quiet, because I need to make sure that they see that they're not right, lest they be wise in their own eyes. So, man, it's a hard job we have to do here. So let's move on to our third segment here on the episode, and that is our reach out question. Reach out and touch someone.
Yeah, there's our jingle, our favorite 80s jingle. And our reach out question this week is, how has listening to your child helped you know how to lead them? Brian, how have you been affected by listening to Ashlyn?
Yeah, well, I think for me, getting to know her, it's easy for me to steer her toward the best version of herself, rather than like the miniature version of me or her mom. And I think that's one of the big things about listening to her and getting to know her, really, not just even in this like verbal communication, but just getting to see her, watching her, being around her, being involved in her life. I think early on when she was a baby, it was like we dressed her the way that we wanted to dress her. We fed her the foods that like we wanted to eat, and we went to the places that we wanted to go. And so as she gets older, though, she starts developing her own preferences, her own personality. And I am just seeing so much that our choices are not her choices. They aren't even close to her choices sometimes. And honestly, that's okay. And so listening to her, I think, has helped me see that she is her own person, and getting to know her, she has so many things that she does way differently than her mom or me. And yeah, she is still a little miniature version of us sometimes, but like, she's a way better artist than any of us ever were. And she loves musicals. She remembers the lyrics to everything that she hears and reads and sees way more than we ever did. And let's just talk about her fashion for a second. She's got a very different fashion sense than mom or I ever had. So rather than continuing to like impose our way, we're listening to her, helping like figure out how to shape her, and helping to kind of work with her, I guess, in a way that matches with her personality and where she is today. And so, yeah, I'm introducing her to things. I'm teaching her lessons. I'm listening to her and letting her come to her own conclusions about things. There was a good example the other night. I was explaining to her about money and money management. She's 10, going on 11, and like, she has this hoarder mentality when it comes to like cash. She doesn't spend money. She like squirrels it away in her room. It's hidden somewhere in there. And so I was talking to her about money, and I'm not trying to push her. I don't want her to make decisions just because dad said so. So I was trying to explain to her that like, here's how interest works. Here's how the bank handles your money. Here's what they do with your money when you give it to them. And we sort of ended the discussion by, I asked her like, you know, would you ever think about putting your money into your bank account. And she was kind of unsure about it, and she kind of stewed on it a little bit. And I made sure not to push it, that I told her what she was going to do. But, later on, she found herself having a conversation with mom about what she was going to do with her money and how she was going to deposit it in the bank and what she was going to look for in terms of an interest rate. And I was like, we're introducing her to things. We're walking there along with her. But the whole time we're letting her make her own choices, and we're listening to her. We're equipping her, definitely. But her choices are her choices, and we're helping her make those choices. And that's all really been initiated, I think, by listening.
Yeah, it's that different stage where you're not training in the way you were training before. You're sort of becoming a coach, on the sidelines, cheering them on.
That's a good analogy.
You give some instruction and practice, but then you send them out on the field, and all you can do is call out from the sidelines, because at some point you're not going to be there on the sidelines. I mean, not that you're not available, but they're going to be dealing with decisions a lot where you're not around. And so
they're going to be playing in another arena at some point.
Yeah, right.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And so there's this sense of wanting to get them competent and get them self-reliant while still you're right there with this series is called Training Wheels, but it's that stage where you take off the training wheels, but you're still running behind them right there, just in case anything, starts to tip over or whatever. I think when I first read this question, how has listening to your child helped you know how to lead them? I was thinking, okay, what have they said that, they just opened up and all of a sudden I understood everything that was going on inside of them. And it's not that way, really, at least with my kids at this stage. It's not like you just tune in and all of a sudden they articulate everything going on in them. But what they say and how they say things are like clues to a mystery that they haven't even solved. And sometimes there are patterns in the kind of things they keep bringing up that let you in on what they're needing. An example, Anna, this week, she tried to save an injured bird, and it had some life for a while. We put it in a box and covered it up and but eventually it died. And I don't remember what she said, but I noticed that I think she was talking about this funeral that she wanted to do with her friends. And I could tell there's just something that wasn't being spoken. She was holding something back. And so we slowed down, we hugged her, and then boom, it's like the floodgates opened and she broke down, she opened up. And so my point in all of this is that it's usually not what they say, but just paying attention to what's going on. That's all part of listening. Like that proverb that I quoted, that bonus proverb, the Lord has given us eyes to see and hearing ears, so use them. And I need to pay attention to what's going on with them. How much do I miss? So much, but it's really worth the attention, I find, whenever I'm tuning in.
Oh yeah, you're right on there about the clues. I mean, it's like, it really is sometimes like, hey, it was that one guy in the library with a lead pipe. It's like, that's pretty much what it's like. You're trying to string these things together sometimes. And man, I have found myself so many times, maybe it's being a dad with girls, but like I found myself so many times just staring across the living room saying, do you need a hug? And then just having that moment where it's like, oh, everything just opens up. The floodgates, the dam breaks and the room floods. It's just that way sometimes where you can tell something's wrong. Like you tap into those clues. And I think being somebody who can sort of intuit some of that stuff as a parent, like you just have to become that way. You have to become a sleuth, a detective trying to figure out, what are they trying to tell me without actually telling me that?
I mean, I don't know what's going on with me most of the time. So
that's
it's
true.
It's nice sometimes having, my wife certainly is the sleuth that tells me sometimes what's happening with me. So absolutely. Yeah, that's just part of relationships is being attentive.
All right. So let's lead into our challenge here on the episode. We're going to suggest something that you all can do along with us this week.
I am ready to face any challenges that might be foolish enough to face me.
So we picked a challenge that really isn't a challenge for me because it's something I do every week all the time anyway, and that's to go on a date night with your child and ask them about their interests. And for us, this is our Tuesday night daddy-daughter date nights. We go have dessert at AJ's, which is a grocery store around the corner. Each of us chooses a dessert. Sometimes we drive there, sometimes we'll walk, but usually we're just talking about school, talking about what's going on at home. And those are the moments where I'm all ears. Like whatever it is that she wants to talk about, she is in the driver's seat. I mean, I'm actually driving us to the grocery store, but she's driving the conversation. And it's so funny too, because these are kind of moments between her and I, but like, though mom isn't there, sometimes I'll coordinate some of these conversation topics with mom behind closed doors. And maybe she can keep this conversation going with Ashlyn later on her own. And so we kind of do this for each other every now and again, where we'll talk about what we've been talking about with her. And so we can each kind of tag team together on these conversations and keep the ball rolling. So I don't know. I feel like it's really good to get to know her in like these casual ways. And that's made a big difference, I think, over the last few years with how much she trusts us and how much influence I think we have over her right now. Yeah, she's 11, going on 17. So we'll see if that changes going down the road.
Yeah, I love that practice. Does Ashlyn listen to this? Because your secret might be out on this.
I know.
But
I just thought about that. We'll have to edit this whole part out. So.
I love that you guys do that, and that time together to have a date, have those singular conversations that you are showing them as you're kind of putting your elbows on the table and giving them all of your attention. It really makes a difference. And I've found, I've only done it a couple times, like with my 4-year-old, but it's like there was a change in her after we just decided, okay, I'm going to try to do this with all the kids at some point, and we're not as regular, but it's really, really a worthy challenge. I love this challenge for us to put out there.
Definitely worthy.
So let's close this discussion with a closing prayer. And our suggested prayer in the study guide is, Almighty Father, teach me to listen to others the way you listen to me, from Jeremiah 29:12. And so let's go to God in prayer and ask for some help as we try to communicate with our children. Father, we begin this prayer settling into the incredible truth that you hear us, that our words don't just reach you, Creator, but that you lean in and care deeply what we say. We ask you, Lord, that we would be able to listen to each other like whoever we're with is your sacred image bearer, like they have something within them worthy of attention, and their words and their life really matter. Help us to slow down with each other and love each other. Let us learn to love from you. We want to be serious students in your masterclass of love. Father, help us to stay awake when we're choosing our words, to stay alert and thoughtful as we choose words that nourish. We pray for your forgiveness of any destructive or careless words that we've ever spoken. We pray that all our communication with our children, with everyone else, will reflect your goodness. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So next week, we're going to get into our 11th study session in this Training Wheels series. Coming to the end, we're going to get into a final portion of it that we're calling Sending Them Out. We talked about shaping and shepherding these last several weeks. Now we're talking about sending them out. And this next conversation is going to be about guiding them through trouble, which I think will be a challenging but helpful conversation as we think about the fact that our kids are going to go through trouble. And we, like we were talking about, being on the sidelines there, want to be able to help them, not only prepare them, but help them and coach them as they go through difficult things, difficult relationships, difficult times in life. And so to prepare for that conversation, we want to encourage everybody to read Luke 15, 11 to 31. That's a familiar story. And John 17, verses 6 to 19. And Psalm 23, verses 4 to 6.
Yeah, guiding them through trouble. I think this is about the time in our conversations where we are going to brace for impact. It's going to get heavy and serious, I think, here on the next couple episodes, but I think there's a lot of hope at the end of this whole journey.
For sure.
And maybe the last episode is the one we should jump straight to, but we'll walk through the valley of the shadow of death before we get there. So thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in to this conversation about conversations here on episode 149 of our show. You can find show notes for this episode in your podcast player of choice or at BibleGeeks.fm/149. You can also follow along with this guided study on our website at BibleGeeks.fm/training wheels. Feel free to share all of those videos, those conversation starters with others. We'd love it if you would spread the good word about this guided study series that we've been doing. And until next week, everyone, may the Lord bless you and keep you.
Shalom.